From a bitter stew to a truckload of lettuce, these 5 harrowing tales reveal how ordinary vegetables turned deadly. Uncover the chilling details of unexpected tragedies, where simple meals and routine tasks led to unimaginable loss. Prepare to rethink what you thought was safe in these shocking true stories. July 28, 2010 was supposed to be an ordinary day in Mount Carroll, Illinois. As morning came, 3 young men, Wyatt Whitebread, Alex Pacas, and Will Piper, made their way toward the Hosbach grain storage complex, where they were supposed to walk down the corn. Yet by nightfall, the rural town would be gripped by unspeakable tragedy. At 14 years old, Wyatt Whitebread was a spirited boy. He had been excited to earn his first paycheck working at the Hosbach grain storage complex. But things had changed. Wyatt had recently expressed unease about the nature of his work, even proclaiming that he wished he never had to see another kernel of corn for the rest of his life. His co-workers were 19-year-old Alex Pacas and 20-year-old Will Piper. None of them had experience in grain handling, which had proved to be a lot more complicated than they'd anticipated. And none of them fully grasped the dangers of the task they faced that day, breaking up clogged corn in a grain bin towering 4 stories high. The job, referred to as walking down the corn, required the boys to shovel kernels toward a central drain hole at the bottom of the bin, allowing the corn to flow freely into the conveyor below. The work began smoothly, but the conditions were dangerous. Beneath the 250,000 bushels of damp, compacted corn was an active conveyor system whose continuous movement turned the grain into a fluid trap. It was about 9:45 a.m. that day when 14-year-old Wyatt began sinking into the corn, the damp grain swallowing him like quicksand. Alex and Will sprang into action. The older boys attempted to pull Wyatt free, grasping him under the arms, but it was useless. The unstable surface gave way beneath their feet, and before they knew it, Alex and Will started to sink as well. Wyatt disappeared first, buried by the cascading corn. Alex and Will struggled to stay afloat as the grains piled relentlessly around them. Alex's cries for help grew fainter as the corn reached his neck and then his chin. Will, trapped up to his chest, used his free arm to try and keep the kernels away from Alex's head. But Will couldn't keep up with the cascade of corn. Soon after, he couldn't do anything but watch in horror as his friend succumbed and wondered if he was going to be next. By now, the corn was up to his chin. Hosbach supervisor Matt Schaffner called for help and then climbed into the bin himself to try to dig the boys out. But he quickly realized it was an impossible task. The Mount Carroll Fire Department arrived within minutes, quickly realizing the enormity of the situation. Grain bins are notoriously treacherous, and extracting victims from them requires specialized techniques. Firefighters, paramedics, and technical rescue teams converged on the site, eventually numbering over 200 responders. Rescuers employed grain vacuums, custom-made rescue tubes, and even improvised methods like cutting the bottom out of a bucket to shield Will's face. They worked tirelessly in stifling heat, battling a heat index of 114 degrees inside the metal silo. Despite their efforts, progress was painstakingly slow. Will Piper remained trapped for nearly 6 hours, his body immobilized and his mind haunted by the death of his friends. At one point, rescuers instructed him to embrace Alex's lifeless body to create space for the vacuum to work. Will was eventually rescued and taken to the hospital. Alex's body was retrieved, but Wyatt's remains were buried under layers of corn. Rescuers worked late into the night, finally recovering the 14-year-old's remains. The loss of Wyatt Whitebread and Alex Pacas devastated their families. Will Piper faced profound emotional scars. Even more, the tragedy revealed glaring safety failures at Hosbach LC. OSHA's investigation uncovered 25 safety violations, including 12 classified as willful. The boys had received no safety training, were not equipped with harnesses, and were sent into the bin while the machinery below remained operational, a direct violation of safety protocols. Hosbach LLC was initially fined $555,000, but this was later reduced to $200,000, igniting outrage among the victims' families. Civil lawsuits followed, with a jury awarding nearly $17 million in damages, $8 million each to the families of Wyatt and Alex, and $875,000 to Will. The verdict marked a record for Carroll County, but brought little solace to the grieving families. Wyatt's mother, Carla, a retired Army major, struggled with the knowledge that Wyatt hadn't told her he was running down corn. Alex's mother, Annette, grappled with the knowledge that her son died in terror, his final moments consumed by fear. Nothing could bring their children back. Whole lives can change in mere seconds in the most unexpected ways. It is a truth that the town of Lyshevo, nestled near the Volga River in Russia's Tatarstan Republic, came to understand on a fateful day in 2013. It began with a simple household task that spiraled into a catastrophic loss, leaving a young girl as the sole survivor of her family. It all started when Mikhail Chalishev, a 42-year-old law professor at Kazan Federal University, descended into the family cellar. It was supposed to be a simple, routine task. But unbeknownst to Mikhail, the potatoes stored in the cellar had rotted, releasing what was a foul odor, and even more importantly, a deadly gas. Glycoalkaloids, naturally occurring toxic compounds in potatoes, had accumulated to lethal levels, creating a virtually undetectable trap in the small room. Soon after Mikhail entered the cellar, the noxious fumes completely overwhelmed Mikhail, and he collapsed, never to rise again. A short while later, when Mikhail failed to return, his wife Anastasia became worried. The woman, who was 38 years old, decided to follow him into the cellar, concerned for his safety. Sadly, this decision sealed her fate. She entered the cellar and was overcome by the toxic gas almost immediately. She collapsed to the floor, joining her husband in his untimely end. Their son, Georgy Chalishev, was alarmed by his parents' prolonged absence. After all, they were supposed to go into the cellar and get right back, something they'd done so many times before. Concerned, Georgy, who was only 18 years old, entered the cellar next, only to succumb to the same deadly fate. Meanwhile, Anastasia's mother, 68-year-old Iraida, became increasingly anxious. She couldn't help but feel that something was incredibly wrong with her family. She decided she needed assistance, so she called a neighbor for help. But Iraida did not wait for help to come. The older woman took the matter into her own hands and decided to act herself. Tragically, Iraida also descended into the cellar before help could arrive, sealing her fate alongside her loved ones. In a twist of fate that resembles something out of a fairy tale, the family's daughter, 8-year-old Maria Chelisheva, was the only one of her family to survive. When she reached the cellar, she saw that the door was open, which allowed the lethal gases to dissipate enough to spare the little girl. But the sight she encountered would forever haunt her. Her entire family, her father, her mother, her brother, and her grandmother, lay lifeless on the floor. It was too late. The aftermath of this tragedy left Maria orphaned and inconsolable. Maria Chelisheva was taken in by relatives, but nothing could bring her family back. Her dad, Professor Mikhail Chelishev, was honored by Kazan Federal University in a moving ceremony held in its marble hall. The devastating incident highlighted the hidden dangers of everyday foods. Potatoes, a dietary staple, can produce toxic glycoalkaloids such as solanine and sheikonine, especially when stored improperly or allowed to rot. These compounds disrupt cell membranes and affect the nervous system, causing symptoms like weakness, confusion, and in severe cases, death. Exposure to light, age, and physical damage significantly increase glycoalkaloid levels, concentrating the toxins just beneath the skin. While rare, poisoning from potatoes can have fatal consequences, as this tragedy so painfully demonstrated. It was late afternoon of January 29, 1931, when neighbors and friends gathered at Edward and Delphine Hines' farmstead near Grafton, North Dakota. The Hines were throwing a festive dinner party which promised to be an evening of dancing, laughter, and games, a much-needed reprieve from the harsh winter. But as the night wore on, the unsuspecting guests were served a meal that would forever be marked in North Dakota's history. The party concluded with a late-night spread prepared by Delphine. Among the courses was a pea salad featuring home-canned peas, which Delphine had prepared herself, mayonnaise, cheese, and lettuce. Unbeknownst to everyone, including the Hines, these peas harbored a hidden deadly menace. The nightmare began the following day. Arthur Geranby, a 31-year-old farmer, experienced intense stomach pains while tending to his chores. He alerted his family, which rushed to his aid, but not even them or the doctors they employed could save Arthur. By Saturday, he had slipped into a coma. In the meantime, the doctors had figured out the cause of Arthur's illness, the botulinum toxin, produced by the bacteria Clostridium botulinum. On Saturday afternoon, Arthur Geranby succumbed to the toxin's effects. His death marked the beginning of an unrelenting series of tragedies. Harry Chapioski, an 8th grader who had attended the party, appeared healthy enough to play in a basketball game on Friday. Yet by the next evening, he too was gone. Harry's mom, Mrs. Thomas Chapioski, died a day later, followed closely by her lifelong friend, who had also attended the party, Mrs. Elmer Stoke. Delphine Hine and her family were not spared. The first to fall ill was Edward Jr., her 16-year-old son, who passed away on Saturday evening. Delphine herself succumbed just 4 hours later. By Sunday night, Edward Sr. and their eldest daughter, 20-year-old Elizabeth, had also perished. Genevieve, only 15, followed early Monday morning. The poison did not discriminate, taking the lives of 13 party attendees over 9 days. Among the deceased were lifelong friends, close relatives, and neighbors. The deaths were eerily consistent, with symptoms of dizziness, impaired vision, and respiratory failure marking the toxin's lethal progression. Those who survived, such as Elmer Stoke, were spared only by chance. Elmer had not eaten the salad. Medical experts acted swiftly once botulism was identified as the culprit. A specialist from the University of Chicago traveled to Grafton with antitoxin serum, but the treatment was rare and prohibitively expensive. It was also only effective if administered early in the illness, and by the time it reached the town, most victims were beyond saving. The last fatality, Winfield Ware, died 9 days after the party, having shown signs of improvement before his condition rapidly deteriorated. Elmer Stoke wasn't the only survivor. 3 of the Hine children also survived. 14-year-old Richard, 12-year-old Wilfred, and 3-year-old Marvin had been spared only because they were too young to join the party and had remained in their rooms that night. Yet their survival came at an unimaginable cost. They lost both parents and 3 siblings in a matter of days. The boys were taken in by relatives, but their lives were forever altered. Richard, known as Dick, grew up quickly, leaving his relatives' home to work as a farm laborer. He would go on to establish his successful dairy operation in Minnesota, passing away in 2013 at age 96. Wilfred, or Bill, worked in California's aircraft industry, while Marvin, affectionately called Buddy, returned to North Dakota after serving in World War II and built a life in the grain business. Despite their resilience, the trauma of the event lingered with them. Dick's poignant plea to save their mother's wedding ring so they would have something to remember her by underscored the depth of their loss. It was a tragedy unlike anything Grafton or North America had seen before. Residents mourned the victims during a 4-day funeral procession, during which the town closed its businesses and declared a period of mourning. Fear spread as homemakers threw away their home-canned goods, many discarding entire pantries, despite the economic hardship of the Great Depression. For months, some families subsisted on little more than toast and tea, wary of hidden dangers lurking in their food. But there are lessons to be learned even in the darkest of times. The disaster prompted greater scrutiny of home canning practices, highlighting the importance of proper sterilization and the use of pressure canners for low-acid foods. Though botulism remains rare, the Grafton tragedy stands as a stark reminder of its deadly potential. Today, advancements in food safety guidelines and education seek to prevent such a tragedy from recurring. However, the memory of the Poison Pea Party became a cautionary tale, etched into the history of a town that would never forget. It began as an ordinary Sunday in a quiet village near Heidenheim in Germany. Ludwig A., a 79-year-old man, and his wife, 80-year-old Inge, spent the first part of their day going to church. And then, it was time for their traditional Sunday roast. But the couple decided to forego this culinary tradition for a hearty vegetable stew. By the end of the day, it was clear that this seemingly innocent event would lead to an unimaginable tragedy. The couple had received zucchini from Ludwig's sister-in-law's garden, something that had become a yearly tradition by then. Alongside potatoes, onions, and turnips, the zucchini became the centerpiece of their lunch. As they ate, though, they noticed something was unusual about their stew. The dish was uncharacteristically bitter. They were accustomed to bitter taste since they grew and enjoyed radishes from their garden. But this was different. Inge chose not to finish her meal. Ludwig, however, ate his portion despite the bitterness. 2 hours later, they came to regret their decision. Both fell violently ill. Nausea and relentless vomiting gripped them, accompanied by diarrhea. Out of the two of them, though, Ludwig was faring worse. His condition rapidly worsened. His strength dwindled. And then, his face turned yellow. Alarmed, they decided it was time to seek medical help. Their family doctor promptly referred them to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed severe poisoning. The culprit, cucurbitacin, a toxic compound sometimes found in plants of the Cucurbitaceae family, including zucchini. The toxic compound is rare in cultivated vegetables, but can occasionally reappear due to cross-pollination with wild plants. Its bitter taste serves as a warning, but Ludwig and Inge had been unaware of its danger. The toxin attacked their organs with devastating effects. In Ludwig's case, his lungs became inflamed, and according to Inge, the toxin shredded his intestines. Inge, who had eaten less and vomited more frequently, began to recover. Ludwig's condition, however, spiraled downward. Inge made a full recovery and was discharged from the hospital, but Ludwig wasn't as fortunate. 3 days later, Ludwig A. passed away. Inge later reflected that her survival might have been due to her swift and severe reaction to the toxin, which expelled much of it from her system before it could do irreparable harm. His tragic death prompted investigations by health authorities and the Ellwangen Public Prosecutor's Office. The Chemical and Veterinary Investigation Office, also known as CVUA, issued an urgent warning. Vegetables such as zucchini, pumpkins, and cucumbers that taste bitter should not be consumed, as this could indicate the presence of cucurbitacin. Maria Roth, the CVUA's director, confirmed that Ludwig's death was the first recorded fatality from this toxin in zucchini. In January 2007, Sheila K. Ross and her husband Dane, seasoned truck drivers from McLeod, Oklahoma, were on a routine trip. They had traveled to Yuma, Arizona to collect supplies from a Dole plant. But what began as an ordinary evening would take a devastating turn, changing the lives of all those involved. That evening, when they arrived at the plant in Arizona, Sheila exited their truck to retrieve paperwork for their load. But when the 47-year-old woman failed to return, her husband Dane became overcome by worry. He too exited the truck and searched the premises himself, but there was no sign of his wife. Dane decided to notify the Yuma police and ask for their help. Officers conducted an extensive search but found no sign of Sheila. As hours turned into days, her disappearance remained a mystery. 3 days later, a dock worker at the Hy-Vee grocery store distribution center in Chariton, Iowa, made a grim discovery. Sheila's body was found in the back of a semi-trailer delivering lettuce. The trailer, owned by a different trucking company, had been at the same Dole plant in Yuma on the night Sheila disappeared. Authorities determined that Sheila had been pinned inside the truck during loading, and the compressive force of the pallets of lettuce caused her death. According to Dr. John Kramer, the autopsy showed Sheila was as Investigators believe Sheila was accidentally pushed into the trailer by a forklift operating in the loading area. Unnoticed by the driver, she became trapped between the heavy pallets of produce. The intense pressure left her unable to breathe. Her body remained undetected as the trailer traveled nearly 1,500 miles to Iowa. Sheila died on Tuesday, January 30th, 2007. Statements from Dole confirmed the company's cooperation with law enforcement, but offered little solace to Sheila's grieving family. The lettuce in the shipment was destroyed, a minor detail in the face of such a profound loss. Sheila, remembered as a dedicated truck driver and loving wife, had worked alongside Dane for years. Married in 1980, the couple shared a son, Daniel, and a granddaughter. Her funeral service, held on February 5, 2007, brought together family and friends to honor her memory.